Hey everyone, this is Bruce and George in Small Pond, and today we're talking about how to find someone to mix and potentially master your music. The first question is, how do we do this well so that when it's mixed later on it's going to actually sound okay? We're seeing more and more bands, for reasons of budget, recording at home.
Yeah, I think have a vision. Know your vision. Biggest thing I would say is have reference tracks. If you've got an idea of a mix engineer or someone in mind, contact them before you start, because they might have a cheat sheet that they give you on. For example, I do one that's like, always take a guitar DI. I'd like things labelled like this because it just makes my life easier when I bring it into my project.
Okay, and that's really interesting. And I suppose people need to have a base level of engineering skill.
Yeah.
I mean, people have made records on GarageBand, but
yeah.
not very often. I suppose you're getting stuff on.
I get a lot of
Logic
stuff that people are doing in Logic themselves, mainly because it's the affordability of Logic. One of the biggest things is the degree of editing you do yourself, because if you're and establishing this with the mix engineer, because they're a mix engineer, not an editing engineer, and they need to know. You need to know what you're hiring them for. Sometimes you can hire them to do some extra editing. There are editing engineers out there who will just do that, but don't expect them to edit it for you if you haven't already established that.
And I think at this stage it's tempting to sort of give out a basic spec of a home studio, but I'm reluctant to do that because people are making great music with in inventive ways with very limited gear, and that's always been the way. Sometimes the limitations become part of the creative process.
You can make great records with one microphone. I've made records with one microphone in a bedroom that we've used for adverts, and they've gone on TV shows, and it was one mic and a simple interface.
So let's concentrate on writing great songs with great lyrics, great subject matter, great choruses, all the rest of it, and finding a way to record it. And I think it's quite cool to learn that on the fly. Most of you guys will know people with some degree of ability as well and some experience. So pull in friends, do favours, and if you can't afford to be in a place like we're in today, just get on with it at home. Build your skills, build the experience, and build some songs.
So quick tips for tracking: always take a guitar DI, even if you're using like an amp simulator like Guitar Rig. When you send it to mix, duplicate that and have the wet one with the sort of simulated sound and a dry one, because there's always the option of reamping it further down the line if the mix engineer needs to, and it also really helps with editing. So always take a guitar DI. Tip number 2, make sure you have a good signal to noise ratio. So you want to leave some headroom, make sure nothing's clipping. And the engineer can always bring down the region clips when they come to mix, but just make sure nothing's clipping and it's all in the sort of -10 region.
Yeah.
Tip number 3, make sure you do your editing, or you've established who's going to do the editing between the mix engineer. Maybe they've got an edit engineer, but just make sure this is established, because you don't want to eat up the money you're spending on mixing on them actually doing editing and fixing things, because you're just going to end up with an upset mix engineer. Tip number 4, if you are choosing to do live drums, you can always come into a studio like Small Pond and do your drums here for a day, and then go away and do everything else yourself. But the drums for me are one of the telltale signs of a self-produced record if it's not done properly. So don't be afraid to sort of hire that out to someone else to get the best record you can.
So, if we've made the record at home to save the budget, this is a truly international opportunity, because you've got mix engineers all around the world. You send the stems, they come back with a mix. So again, a bit like when we were talking about choosing a producer for the tracking, you've got to do your research and work out who's out there. Approach them through the managers if they're a big name, or another cool professional way through a direct email through their website. Find out how much they cost, but be clear in your mind what they can bring to the project. So from my own requirements, I'm quite traditional, so I like to hear that big desk sound, that glue and that openness that comes from using a big old Neve desk. So for me, I wouldn't want to work with someone who mixes in the box, because it doesn't work with the style of music I do. So I'm going to research that a little bit. What studio are they going to be mixing in and what gear? And really the telltale thing is just their work. What does it sound like? So when we were mixing Colour of Noise, that we made a traditional rock record, so there's lots of producers to choose from, and we went for Mike Fraser, he just finished AC/DC, he'd done Aerosmith, he's done every big rock band from my generation. And although it wasn't super cheap, it was £1,000 a track, which I appreciate is way out of a lot of people's budget, but he's one of the best in the world. He did a fantastic job. So let's talk about money. How much would we have to pay to find a producer who's worked with a lot of cool bands that we've heard of, who's current, who's actually selling records, what kind of money are we looking at to mix, say, one track?
Anything from, I'd say, £200 a day going upwards. But
Yes.
you can get some people who are sort of on the break of their career and they do £200 a day.
Yes.
And also that this comes down to what we were talking about in the box or on the desk as well.
Yes.
Because some people can work a lot quicker in the box. For example, I do 1 day for the first track and then half a day thereafter usually for the tracks, and then a day for mix notes usually.
So you might be looking to spend anything from 200 quid to 1,000, 2,000, but you can reach some very, very experienced people who've sold millions of records. It's quite easy to do these days, and choose how much budget you want to spend, and you might be able to do a deal for the whole album if you.
Yeah, you would probably get a discount on the whole album. Going back to the singles thing, if you could always just do your first single with someone to get it out there.
Yeah.
And that might help launch the band. So don't be afraid to do your research and find these people, because they are out there. Most YouTube videos, it will say underneath it who's mixed
Yes.
and mastered it. So it's
Just
there.
have a listen to it. If you like the sound of it, contact that person, and then the next important thing, I suppose, is to send them some reference tracks.
Yeah, send them
So
some
they know
tracks
what-
of what that you're working with and references of what you're after sonically, whether it's like, we love this drum sound or we love this guitar sound. And also make sure listen to the mix engineers you're approaching. The amount of times I've had it when people gone, we don't really like what you've done. And it's like, well, if you listen to the records I do, I do rock records, like my drums sound
like
big.
this.
That's kind of what I do. So
You've got to be really clear on this stuff.
Yeah.
Because actually you can remove a lot of the variables, and you know what the thing's going to sound like. You know what you've tracked. You know what they do. You put the two things together, you can kind of imagine where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And how long would it take someone to mix, turn around a track, for example?
I'd say usually a day a track. As I said, I try and do a day a track and then half a day each track thereafter.
Yeah.
And then some days for edits, but it just depends on different people's workflow and what you present them with.
An interesting thing here is I come from an era pre-computers. I can remember when there was no computers in music, and I also remember when computers first came in the late 80s. And mixing used to be a live event. So before the SSL board had the flying faders, the remembered rides, you were literally sat on an old Neve or something, and there'd be 4 people on the desk, and when the guitar solo came or a tambourine came, someone would ride it.
Yeah.
So this gave a real live feel to the mix, and you can hear that on a record like Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. That is a very live mix. You can hear it's almost like a performance, and there's something exciting about that. I mean, I'd invite everybody to try that out and see what happens, because you'll get pretty wild results.
Yeah.
Live with them a few days, and might be something you might want to go with.
If you've got the budget and the mix engineers are permitting, a lot of mix engineers might do a test mix. So ask. There's no harm in asking. Some mix engineers will do a test mix, and you can maybe try a couple of different people and see what you want your record to sound like and who's going to do the right thing.
I think there's an important point here as well. When the mix comes back, you've usually got one opportunity to make some amends.
Yeah.
So it's very important that you get all the band together. You listen to it on proper speakers and not just on your car when half your one speaker's bust or something. Because that's really irritating if stuff comes back 3 or 4 times. You come back with one set of instructions that's ultra clear, even to the point of the vocal's a bit quiet, raise it by 1 dB, nothing vague, and then everyone's happy. Try and get everything done, see it off in one set of amendments.
Yeah, one set.
There's a danger with mixing, especially these days when mixes are recorded and remember themselves, that the mix is never finished and it gets dragged out. So if you're mixing your own material, you have to be a bit disciplined to know when it's finished.
One of my rules as a songwriter was I try not to mix my own material for that reason, and that's why I've always used producers to mix my work because of that. And I think if it's taking you 6 months to mix your record, maybe you need to look at sourcing it out to someone else, because it shouldn't be taking that long.
It's often the case that the people who track it have lost objectivity and don't mix very well.
Yes.
Band and producer and engineer.
Yeah.
So George, once we've finished mixing, what's next? Can we just stick the thing out?
You still need to master it. Most engineers might not have mastered it.
What is mastering?
Mastering is the final stage before it goes to the public. It's that final set of ears that can maybe suggest a change, and it makes each track on a record have balance across the EQ, so it all fits and sits together as a body of work.
So it's an overall EQ, so you can't dive in and fix fundamental mix stuff, but for example I suppose you could pull out a vocal by boosting that frequency a bit. Sort of, you can repair a few things.
Yes, but you want to get it right in the mix. A good mastering engineer will have that relationship with the mix engineer, and he might suggest, hey, bring the hi-hats down, it's causing me a load of trouble. A lot of the time the mix engineer you work with might have a go-to mastering person.
So I suppose overall EQ, compression and general sizzle on the track, and the loudness, how loud your track is compared to other people.
Yeah, and then the big important thing a lot of people forget about, we won't go into too in depth, but is ISRC coding, and that's the coding. So when you put that up on a CD, it comes up with the name, or it's labelled correctly in iTunes.
It's super important. And it's also really important at mastering stage to really think that your music has to sound great on a phone, on an expensive hi-fi, on the radio, and all the rest of it.
So tip 1, try and find your mix engineer maybe before you start your record, so you know how they want it presented to them, so like things like labeling, headroom, and so you're giving them the best that you can to work with.
Tip number 2, just realise you've got the whole world to choose from and some amazing talented people, and do your research, and don't be afraid to be confident to represent your music, because all these great producers, engineers, mixers, they love working with new bands, so you've got more cards to play with than you realise.
Tip number 3, speak to your mix engineer about whether that's going to include mastering, or if they have a go-to mastering person they want to use. This can cost anything from £35 to £150 per track.
Yeah, so find out if it's included. So thanks for listening, everybody. This is Bruce and George broadcasting to you from the WaterBear channel from Small Pond Recording Studio. If you need any other information about the courses we run, particularly the B.A. Honours degree in commercial music, where you can major in production if you want, or the master's qualifications, then contact us through the website, and if you need any advice on your career, you can do the same.